All right, we're going to get started. I know there will be a few stragglers straggling in, but let's go ahead and move forward. So welcome back, or welcome anew for those of you who've just joined us. My name is Peter Harris, and I am humbled and privileged to be the new president of the DFW Alliance for Religious Freedom and Human Dignity. And I'm really excited to be here. And that's, thank you. That's enough about me. So we're going to start out, we've got an awesome evening ahead, and we're going to start before our formal panels with a prayer and then a few comments from our host. Our prayer will be offered this evening by Linda Abramson Evans, who has served for over 35 years in intercultural, interfaith, human rights, medical, and arts initiatives. She's a member of the Interfaith Council in Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square, representing the congregation Beth El Banah, an advisory board member of the United Nations Association Dallas chapter, founder of the Volunteer Guide to Refugee Service Agencies in Dallas-Fort Worth, and serves on the Dallas Office of Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs Task Force. She recently retired after 25 years doing graduate work at SMU, training international students how to speak English well. So we're delighted to have her here offering an opening prayer in her Jewish tradition. After she offers the prayer, we'll hear from Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson. She has Abosh Jacobson is the correct name, right? We had a couple with Sarah Abosh and a couple with Dr. Jacobson, so it's Sarah Abosh Jacobson. We're delighted to have her here representing the museum. She is the Chief Education Officer for the museum and has a long list of accolades in her background regarding her expertise with respect to the history of Jews, not surprisingly. For us tonight, she is really our host. And she's here to welcome us to this venue where we sit at the museum, which in its walls is a living and breathing entity that really has to do with the subject matter about which we're speaking all afternoon and evening tonight. So first Linda and then Dr. Jacobson.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, friends. Well, I am Jewish, but I'm not a member of the clergy, and this is not actually a Jewish prayer. I originally wrote this decades ago for some of my community organizations that were in need, well, I felt that they were in need of a more inclusive option for the kind of prayers that I was hearing at events with a diverse audience. And I've continued to adapt it and share it as needed. And it's really nice to be sharing it in this environment where everyone already knows the value of that. Dear God of many names and all religions and ways of life through which we know you, thank you for food that strengthens our bodies, loved ones who lift our spirits, and your love that sustains our souls. We ask your blessing on this gathering as we strive to better understand and collaborate with each other. And please extend your grace as well to our families, friends, communities, and all people who share this world you have made.
Good evening. It's been a long day. I popped into one of the panels and had a chance. It's one of my regrets having left academia is that my time isn't my own, and so I can't do what I used to do, which you are all doing, which is to spend a day listening to really invigorating and interesting and enlightening conversations by people. But I wanted to welcome you to the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and I wanted to thank you, Peter, and also the DFW Alliance for Religious Freedom for coming to the museum to have your panel this year. I'm Sarah Abosh Jacobson. I'm the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the museum. And we are so honored that you are joining us this year for this program again. At the museum, we're dedicated to teaching the history of the Holocaust and advancing human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference. We were founded 40 years ago by a group of local Holocaust survivors who came together with a vision to ensure that the lessons from the Holocaust are never forgotten. These amazing individuals saw as their legacy the creation of a place to remember their beloved family members who did not survive and to memorialize the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. Our founders grew up in a world of religious intolerance and ultimately murderous hatred for those of different faiths and different beliefs. They understood with every fiber of their beings the need and absolutely vital need for religious freedom, and they lived with the lifelong scars of the horrendous consequences of its absence. The opening of this amazing building 5 years ago was a realization of their dream that was 40 years in the making. We are really so fortunate to have this special museum here in the heart of Dallas to educate our growing community about the history of the Holocaust and to teach them to become upstanders, those who see something wrong and work to make it right. If you have not had the chance to view our exhibitions today, I invite you to come back, and I recommend spending a few hours here if you have the time. Inside our permanent exhibition, you'll learn about the Holocaust and the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the stages of genocide, and what we can do to recognize genocide as it's developing and potentially to disrupt it. And you will learn about America's journey for human and civil rights in our American Ideals, Reality, and Repair gallery through interactive stations which trace the history of different groups of Americans as they work to bring the reality of their lives in America more closely into accord with our country's foundational ideals via the classically American repair process of volunteering, advocating, voting, protesting, educating, complaining, and doing other things as well. One of the 12 strands that we trace in that American Ideals, Reality, and Repair gallery covers the history of working toward religious liberty in America. It starts with Roger Williams. It goes through George Washington and his address to the Touro Synagogue and moves into the current period. Beyond this, our current special exhibition, which will be on view through mid-March and is a fascinating story that explores the little-known history of the diverse resettled Jewish community in Shanghai, China, which ultimately housed 20,000 Jews who fled Nazi and Soviet-occupied Europe for the refuge of Shanghai, again, persecuted to death for their religious beliefs. We also are one of the only 2 museums in the country at this point that have the innovative Dimensions and Testimony Theater that allows you to interact with virtual Holocaust survivors and ask them questions about what their lives were like before, during, and after the Holocaust. By sharing the lessons learned from the Holocaust and other human rights violations, we work to inspire individuals to confront hatred and promote human dignity. Education is at the heart of what we do, and we believe that studying and understanding the tragedies of the past empowers people to take moral and ethical choices. And I know that we count amongst our friends and our colleagues, because the fact that you're here at a conference dealing with the importance of religious liberty and religious freedom in America says that to me very strongly. And I think that together, my hope is that we will continue to make a difference in the world in which we live. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll invite the next panel to come forward, and I'll introduce them a little bit. Thank you, Dr. Jacobson and Linda Abramson-Evans. This next panel, we have 2 panels that are going to unfold before you tonight. This first one is about becoming peacemakers while advocating for religious freedom and human dignity. And, our last session was perhaps an example of what this session is all about. So we're delighted to have with us today, leading the panel, Steve Collis. His students, who I think all get good grades now because they spoke so highly of him during their panel earlier today, is here, and we're glad that he had the time to be here. I know that he was just reviewing yesterday a Texas Supreme Court amicus brief and this morning a Supreme Court amicus brief to be submitted with respect to some of the subjects we're discussing. And the timing is just right for him because he just came out with a book. He didn't know I was going to do this. Oops.
But I'll take it.
Just came out with a book called Habits of a Peacemaker, 10 Habits to Change Our Potentially Toxic Conversations into Healthy Dialogues. Couldn't be more apropos to our theme for this evening. So we'll turn it over to Steve, and he'll introduce the rest of his fantastic panel. And if he does really well, I'm going to see if he'll sign my book tonight.
Is this on? Okay, sounds like this is on. Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you for the book plug. I did not pay him to do that, but I'm happy to share some royalties with you if anyone buys anything. I guess I can't take seriously anything my students say since they have to suck up to me. But I'm thankful to be here with our panel. I think what we've decided we're going to do is each of you is going to take a few minutes to share some remarks, and then I'll talk a little bit about my book as an entree into some questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So just to make sure you all know who you're listening to, we have immediately to my left Shannon Minter, who is the legal director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And to his left, we have Almas Muscatvala. Thank you, yes. She and I were practicing in the back how to say her name. She's an interfaith leader and advocate for diversity and inclusion. And then finally, we have to her left, Sam Brownback, who's formerly the ambassador at large for international freedom, among many other positions in government. Thank you all for being here. I don't know what order you'd like to go in, so I'll let you, Almas, go ahead. All right, wonderful.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Mark and Bill, for having me here. First, when I got the invitation, and I'm like, these guys must have decided, something is crazy about this invitation. But I do recognize, because the topic of, peacemaking is something that I try to strive to live every single day. But now I'm going to try and articulate that in my short kind of scripted remarks that I've prepared. So, Bismillah. Many here today are striving for peace within our communities, nations, and internationally. Peace is necessary to life. It is an instinct for human beings to aspire for peace. However, humans also have an instinct to engage in conflict. It does not take much to know that our world is not in harmony and in a constant state of disagreement. At any given point in the world, countries are in conflict and choosing sometimes war in order to bring peace. Some of the war was referenced, earlier in the panel. We're all witnessing war between Ukraine and Russia, Israel and Gaza, and many conflicts that are at the brim of turning into civil disharmony in countries in Asia and Africa. Recent unrest in India between Hindutva ideology and many minority groups, which was also again referenced earlier, particularly the Muslim community, has isolated the two groups, compromising the very essence of which India's constitution was envisioned and what people stood for. This is the reality in which we live and work. So how do we bring the aspiration of peace in the land of immigrants and religious and cultural ethnicities and identities who call America their home? What kind of religious, political, social, and intellectual disharmonies are we witnessing here in the US that can be addressed? In the US, and Texas, we use the words polarized or divided to verbalize our reality. We are divided and polarized because we struggle to embrace the many different political, gender, and religious choices that people make and their expression in public spaces. That is exactly the moment for which religious freedom efforts like this summit are in place to advocate for people with diverse religious backgrounds and their rights to religious expression privately and publicly for a sense of belonging to the place they identify as home. Religion is an anchor for many families and communities who find their sense of identity in religious expression. Now, the danger of polarization is occurring when the forces of people in power want to homogenize communities in the name of peace and unity. Here I like to quote Rabindranath Tagore, an Indian poet and philosopher and social reformer. He beautifully states, "The perfection of unity is not in uniformity, but in harmony." I'll repeat it. The perfection of unity is not in uniformity, but in harmony. I want to also quote my spiritual leader, His Highness the Aga Khan, who says, "What was required and is still required was a readiness to work across frontiers of distinction and distance without trying to erase them. What we were looking for even then were ways of building an effective cosmopolitan ethic in a fragmented world." End of quote. A cosmopolitan ethic fosters cooperation across differences without erasing them. Cosmopolitan ethics embraces both unity and diversity, countering the fragmentation seen in today's world. The superficial version of globalization focused too much on commonality, leading to fears of cultural homogenization and a defensive reaction against losing individual ethnic and religious identities. Instead of choosing between global unity and preserving unique identities, my faith encourages me to embrace both, valuing diversity while addressing fragmentation. This approach resonates with religious and ethical traditions, particularly the Quranic belief that all humans are born of a single soul, united by a common humanity, enhanced by diversity. Peace-building efforts through the cosmopolitan ethic are possible in the direst situations. But do we rely on ethics and morality as our guiding principles? This was also referenced earlier. As we develop policies that might be dictating a community's destiny. Human dignity is a universal value and calls for a willingness and ability to see the other as equal and be responsible in preserving their sense of self through our efforts. Then a real peace that respects each one of us in our uniqueness will be possible. I do want to conclude once again with a quote from His Highness's speeches, one where I think it's kind of very, very relevant to what we're talking today. He says, "There's a human impulse, it seems, fed by fear, to define identity in negative terms. We often determine who we are by determining who we are against. This fragmenting impulse not only separates people from one another, it also subdivides communities. And then it subdivides the subdivisions. It leads to what some have called the fraying of society, in which communities come to resemble a worn-out cloth, as it tight weaves separates into individual strands. But the human inclination to divisiveness is accompanied, I deeply believe, by a profound human impulse to bridge divisions. And often, the more secure we are in our own identities, we can be more effective in reaching out to others. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I am so happy to be here. I'm always so impressed by just the genuine diversity and inclusiveness of this summit. And Bill, I just want to personally thank you for including me and being so thoughtful every year to include the LGBT community. So I'm just going to talk a little more personally than usual, but I hope it's for a purpose, because I'm part of a community that has been honestly really dangerously reduced of late to a politics or an ideology, and I just want to bring us back to a little bit of common humanity. I mean, I am a transgender man, 63 years old. I've lived in California and New York, in DC, but about 5 years ago, I moved back to Texas, where I was born, to a very, very small town, really small, about 2 hours northeast of here is where I was born. My sister was born. Both my parents were born. Grandparents and great-grandparents lived there. Lots of cousins. I have the joy of living in my grandparents' house. I get to go every Sunday. I'm in church, back to the very small little Methodist church that I used to go to when I was a child. I'm very devoted to that church. When our pastor is ill or on vacation or whatever, I'm like the substitute. I'm on the board of we have a really small community center, but it means a whole lot to our community. I'm on that board. This is a very poor area. Like 63% of the kids who go to our local high school live below the poverty line, and there's a lot of elderly people living in just really brutal poverty, and my wife and I try to do what we can to help with that. We also rescue animals. As everybody who's from Texas knows, we are over-flooded with feral cats and dogs. If anyone needs a kitten, please see me after this. Anyhow, I'm sharing all this because just to tell you, like on a daily basis, I mean, my life is about my faith, my family, my community. The fact that I'm transgender really does not come into, it just doesn't have much, if any, relevance at all. And I share that because I am so confident that is true of the vast majority, overwhelming majority of transgender people in this country, who are just ordinary people, most of whom would prefer to be private about being transgender. I certainly in my daily life prefer that. Of course, my family knows and people I grew up with know, but it's just not something that's, I talk about or that is an issue in my life. So the reason I feel very confident telling you that is true for like the huge majority of the community is just my own experience, my clients I've had over the years, because I'm a lawyer, I work in the LGBT movement. I've had a lot of clients who are transgender, just ordinary people. These are not activists. These are not people who wanted to ever be in a court case, believe me. My client Sterling, who was married for 15 years, he's a transgender man, married for 15 years. He and his wife had a son named Sterling Jr. His son was 13 years old when they divorced because his wife had struggled with substance abuse and she wasn't going to be able to get a handle on it. He just didn't feel he could stay with her. Well, he and his son had no idea his dad was transgender. They were very close, and his wife made the argument, this was before marriage equality, that he was not really a man, they weren't really married, so he wasn't really a parent, and he got cut off from his son. He had no contact with his son as a result of losing that case. When his son turned 18, he got back in touch with them, but believe me, there was a lot of pain and damage that happened in those intervening years. Another young man lived in a small town, a very economically depressed town in Louisiana. You know, he worked at 7-Eleven. He finally got a job that he thought could lead to some, professional career and development at a bank. He was so thrilled. He was doing so well. They were really happy with him. But he couldn't change his driver's license in Louisiana, and he had to do some paperwork for the job. They saw he had an F on his driver's license. That was it. They fired him. I think my former client, Nick Talbot, who's just like, you could not find a more kind of upstanding, all-American person than Nick. He lived with his grandmother on a family farm in Ohio, took care of his grandmother, took care of the farm. His whole ambition in life is to serve in the military. He took classes at night. He got a bachelor's degree and then took classes at night to get a master in criminal justice. He wanted to be as prepared as he could be. We had to challenge the ban that was in place for a while there, but we did. And Nick just texted me a few days ago that he made it through basic. He said, I am now an American soldier. His drill sergeant gave him some kind of award for being an outstanding soldier. He just wants to contribute to our country. I'm telling you these things just because I do feel like we've kind of lost track of this. And so I'll just say, not only do I know that this is what most transgender people like from my own experience, my clients, but just because, like everyone else, transgender people are just ordinary people. They're just like everyone else in this country. The vast majority are good, want to just lead constructive lives. I had a conversation recently that I wanted to share with you all. It made such a huge impression on me. I can't get it off my mind. With a friend of mine who works for a conservative legal nonprofit, a legal organization that advocates for religious freedom and freedom of speech. But we're good friends. We've been friends for about 10 years now. And he reached out to me. He said, hey, I'm getting so many questions from people kind of in his orbit about health care for transgender kids and school issues. And so we talked for like 2.5 hours, and he grilled me and asked me a million questions. I'm not going to try to, go through all that with y'all, but just the high points. I told him, look, I'm telling you what we argue in court when we challenge the bans on medical care for transgender adolescents. The reason that we have won more than 90% of those cases in front of federal district court judges, including some of the most conservative judges in this country, is because here's what we're showing them with evidence. It's a tiny group of kids, less than 1%. There is strong evidence that gender dysphoria, having a brain sex or gender identity that doesn't match your anatomy at birth, is got a strong biological foundation. If you believe, as most people do, and it's fine if you don't, but that some people really are transgender, then of course some kids are also really transgender. And if we can identify them and help them, that's a good thing. That the medical standards require very careful, extensive diagnosis and evaluation. That there's a lot of research that when you support those kids, and there's no kind of medical treatment till they hit adolescence, and then some kids, a very small number, get puberty blockers, and then later in adolescence, some get hormone therapy. There's a lot of research that shows it really helps those young people. That if there's starting to be long-term follow-up studies that show, if you look at the kids that got the treatment, they're pretty much indistinguishable in terms of their mental health from kids who are not transgender. They have a little more anxiety, but other than that, like, they don't have the debilitating depression, suicidality. And if you compare them to kids who don't get that treatment, those kids are really suffering. And that's why providers who work in this area, provide this care. We actually have research that shows that a tiny number of people who go through the medical process of transition regret it, less than 1%. It's unheard of to find a rate that low. The evidence supporting all this is comparable or greater to the evidence for many other medical treatments that everybody takes for granted. Anyway, that's the gist of what we present to courts. And so we talked, and he said, look, what you're saying sounds very reasonable. I don't really have any quarrel with what you're saying. And in the bigger picture, I explained to him, look, we're not trying to change the world. We don't change how people understand sex or gender, change what people believe about sex or gender. This is just a group of people, a tiny group of people who actually exist, and we just would like modest accommodations to be able to lead constructive lives. I mean, really, all transgender people really need is the access to health care, the ability to change your ID so you can function in everyday life. Be nice to have protections against workplace discrimination. That's really, pretty much covers what people need to just lead a decent, constructive, productive lives. So, his response to that was, that sounds, I don't have a quarrel with that. He said, but you have to hear me, that this is not what we hear from many people in your movement. We hear much different things, more extreme things that do require people to make major changes in their own beliefs and values, and that's what we have a problem with. And so I say to you all tonight the same thing I said to him. I acknowledge that. I absolutely acknowledge that, and I would just ask that. Please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that there are people in the movement like me who have much more modest goals and enormous respect for the reality that people have deeply felt religious beliefs about these. These are fundamental issues about gender, marriage, family, sexuality. Completely understand that and want to have as peaceful an accommodation as possible. So that, just leave y'all with that message, because things have become so polarized and politicized, and I do feel there's a danger of losing sight of the actual human beings underneath some of these labels and fights that we're having. So, end of the day, transgender people, the actual human beings who live in this country, are not a political movement or an ideology, just ordinary people like you all. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate that. Thank you all for being here this evening. I'm going to sit and just make a few quick comments here. Number one, my point that I want to get to and to put in front of you is that I think if we're going to ever move the world towards more peace, it's going to be through religious people that this is going to take place. And I want to build that statement because I've worked at State Department previously. I've been around a number of international relations issues. Normally, religions are pushed to the side and seen as a problem and seen as problematic and seen as people that get dogmatic in their views and are not constructive on peacemaking. My view of this is if you're going to actually get somewhere, you've got to go through people that are people of faith, because most of the world, as Amos just was pointing out, most of the people move by their faith. 80% of the world claims a faith of some type that is central to them. It's central to their being. And so if you're going to get anything done, you've got to deal with that central being of who they are. Case in point, the Abrahamic Accords that started to move forward peace in the Middle East before we got really the terrible difficulty and turmoil we're in now. Why was it named the Abrahamic Accords? Because these three monotheistic faiths claim the same guy that started them. They all claim Abraham. The Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims. And so they said, well, if we can center around this idea of a common notion here, let's try to move this on forward. And that's what we could get done. In India, there's a lot of you noted about the difficulty that's taking place for various religious groups in India. We need to go to the leaders of the Hindu faith, that's the dominant faith in the country, and talk with them. I think before you go to the political leaders, you need to go to the religious leaders. Politics is downstream from religion and culture. Religion and culture are the forming institutions, and politics is a product of these two. Go upstream. Go to the Hindu leaders and say, look, we've got way too many Muslims and Christians I know of, and probably other groups, that are getting harmed and killed in India, in the biggest democracy on the planet, biggest country on the planet. And yet we don't. We go to the political leaders and we say to them, you need to fix this. This is a terrible problem. they are having to respond because if they're an elected country, it's a representative democracy, they've got to respond to their constituency. Whereas you can go to the religious leader and you can appeal to the heart, you can appeal to the soul. You can say, do you want this persecution and these people being killed? Imagine with me, if you would, if we got the major, just in this case, I want to talk about the monotheistic faiths, the major monotheistic faiths of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and the leaders of those three faiths, some of the key leaders, together, and signed a one-sentence document that our theology does not support killing someone that's different from our faith. We all have just war doctrines, we've got other doctrines, but just you cannot kill just because they don't share our faith. And one sentence, you'd be much better crafted, Stephen, you'd do this, or somebody else would get a nice, clean lawyer statement put together, but just have them sign that and stand in front of Abraham's tomb together with the document in their robes saying, Dad is back here. And we agree. And if this is all our dad, then there's some sort of common there's some sort of common heritage here if we all claim the same dad, right? And we've been fighting and killing each other, right? So why are we doing that? And how upset must he be that we're doing this? And what a gift to the world if the religious leaders, some of the key ones, would do this, and how much peace could we start to move forward? And then you take that show on the road. Take it to Nigeria. Take it to the Balkans. And where we start apologizing to each other for the heinous things we've done to each other, which we have, which my faith has done and which others have done too. But imagine where you could start to get with that if you just started working backwards through the religious leaders to get to peace, instead of shunning them to the side or ignoring them or saying they're a problem, or really much of politics is getting your team fired up, which fires the other team up too, I might add, and then people scrum, and whoever can push the most wins the fight. That's not where we're going to get to peace. It's going to be through the religious leaders. And Bob Roberts is a good friend of mine, and I want to commend his work of bringing pastors and imams together at a grassroots level, because that's really where we're going to start to see some of these real peacemaking things happen. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all three of you. And in our exchanges, you all asked me just to mention my book and these habits of peacemakers. And the good news is all of you who are in this room, people like you in this room, are the foundation of this book. Because what happened was I travel all over the globe talking about these issues, LGBT plus rights issues, free speech, religious freedom, campus protests, right? International religious freedom problems. And I talk on panels like this and with other academics and with audiences like this. And what I realized is that in these environments, we are having productive conversations about these very difficult topics. But for most of society, they can't even imagine having a productive conversation about most of these topics. What we saw earlier today, talking about Israel and Hamas up on this stage, is almost impossible right now in the rest of society. And so it got me wondering about three and a half years ago, what are the habits that we are all engaged in that are allowing this type of productive discourse to happen? And can I figure that out? Can I understand the science behind those habits and then condense it down into a book that I can pass them on to others? And so I'm going to just skip over the 10 habits real quick, and I'm going to tie them into some things each of you said. So the first habit I realized that people who can have really good productive conversations about difficult topics, that's how I define a peacemaker, are people who start off from a place of humility and recognizing how little they actually know about the world. And often they'll reframe almost every conversation to acknowledge how little they truly know. And if you all stop and think about it, here's a habit you can engage in. Just look around where you're sitting right now. I see some of my students looking at their phones. Look at your phones or your shirts or whatever's in your lap and ask yourself if you truly understand look at your name tags. How were those made? every detail of it. How are the molecules holding them together? What were the ideas that led to the little holes that led the straps to come to work? What were the economic regulations in different parts of the world that allowed those name tags to work? Where were they shipped from? How does the atmospheric pressure in the room affect the material that those are named? I could go on forever. What you're going to realize is even about your name tags, you probably know less than like 1%. Like you're barely getting over 0% of what you could know about those name tags. So peacemakers start from a place of humility. The second thing they do, and this was evidenced in what you shared, Shannon, is they engage in real learning. That is to say, they actually go out and seek knowledge from primary sources, and they don't allow our culture and our world. You know, Sam, you're talking about our culture kind of politics is downstream from the culture. Too many of us are just being spoon-fed our impressions of reality instead of engaging in real learning. And the story you shared of somebody on the opposite side of the V in litigation calling you up and having a real conversation to actually understand the issues. At least there you can understand where you truly disagree with one another, right? They tend to assume the best about people in their lives with whom they're having conversations. So don't get me wrong, there are bad actors in this world, right? But too many of us strut around assuming that there's the people who agree with us, and then there are monsters and fools, right? Peacemakers tend to assume that the people with whom they're dealing probably have good motivations at root. This is what Sam's talking about. What is the common thing we have in common? And then we can go from there, right? Second, they don't feed people's worst fears. So if everybody around the world is assuming that if I disagree with them, I'm either a fool or a monster, the absolute worst thing I can do is act like a fool or a monster and confirm their worries, right? So we have to behave in a way that lifts people up, that makes them, in our daily living, we have to behave in a way that makes it so people will want to have conversations with us. They're open to change. Amos, you shared the story about trying to get a forced unity. The case that one of my students brought up earlier, Barnett versus West Virginia, actually, the Jehovah's Witnesses lost every single one of those cases when they came up to the Supreme Court. And then 3 justices on the Supreme Court retired and were replaced, and 2 justices changed their minds. And when they changed their minds, they recalled every single one of the Jehovah's Witnesses cases up, and they issued a new opinion. And that new opinion became the one that my student was talking about that has become the bedrock for First Amendment law. And one of the things they said in it is they detailed this history of humanity trying to force religious unity on their people. And that in every single instance where that has ended up is in some kind of a genocide. And then they had this great line where they said the First Amendment to our Constitution was designed to avoid these ends by avoiding these beginnings. So being willing to change our minds, just like those justices did. Peacemakers spend time with people, like you all here, spending time with people who are different than you, sometimes doing anything other than talking about difficult topics, right? Go watch a ball game. Ambassador Brownback and I were talking about the Longhorns beating Oklahoma. No offense to those of you who are Sooner fans, okay?
You talk about monsters and fools, huh?
Yeah, right, that's right, yeah. Maybe that's the one area where people can be fools and monsters. Okay. Finally, the last 3 habits. Peacemakers learn how to use humor. They learn how to use humor to defuse situations and make them more pleasant. They try to achieve a sense of inner peace themselves. And they work very hard on that, including engaging in spiritual practices. And finally, they embrace what I'm going to call the discomfort of non-closure. That is to say, they recognize that in any one conversation, Shannon and I probably disagree on a million things. I'm not going to change his mind in one conversation. It's okay if we just make a little progress towards understanding each other better. Even that is a step forward and is way better than the discord we see in most of the world around us, right? So these are the habits of peacemakers, and I'd like to turn it now back to you all, and I guess, Sam, I'll start with you. You mentioned this idea of, we see all these different religions making the same mistake, and you said even your own religion, right? And so one of my students mentioned earlier that in the religious freedom realm, we have this thing called the Puritan mistake, this idea that the Puritans came to these shores for religious freedom, but they were interested in religious freedom only for themselves, right? And they actually passed a law. They said you can be a Puritan or you can get out of Massachusetts. So I asked the scholar who called that the Puritan mistake, I said, why'd you pick on the poor Puritans? As far as I can tell, every group of humans on earth has committed the Puritan mistake, right? We see it again and again and again. And he kind of gave me a boring academic answer. And all I kept thinking was, probably because calling it the human mistake sounds like something like the George Costanza from Seinfeld would come up with. Like, it's not the most intelligent way of calling it, so Puritan mistake sounds more sophisticated, but it's the human mistake. How do we do what you're describing? Overcoming the very natural human tendency to commit the Puritan mistake, to want to protect ourselves and our tribe and not others.
Well, I think you've touched on a natural human instinct, but it's one that now we should learn that, okay, we've tried this one and we've tried it and it's gone wrong. And the world is so interconnected anymore now. You're going to get just a lot of carnage if people continue to do the Puritan mistake, or whatever you want to call it. You will have the clash of civilizations, only you're going to have it on microcosms because there's so many people of different faiths all over the world. Texas didn't used to have a lot of Hindus probably, or Muslims, but there are now, and they're not leaving, and we don't want them to leave. We want everybody to be able to, so we've got to then get to something that's different. And that, to me, would be this idea that you protect everybody's religious freedom and everybody stands up for each other's religious freedom. So that I stand up for yours, I stand up for everybody's here. Now, I hope everybody comes to know Jesus as Lord and Savior. That's mine. And I presume there are other people in the audience that look at things differently. That's okay. We protect each other's right to do that and to be there and to stand faithfully and sure. And that's the only way you're going to be able to have peace in this very interconnected world that our name tags even come from 20 different countries, or the pieces of it come. We don't do that, we're going to be killing each other for a long time. One final quick thought on this. Genocides almost always happen to religious groups. When you track genocides in the world, it's almost always a religious group, and it's a minority religious group. Dirty little secret, every religion is a minority somewhere. So you're going to get it somewhere too, or your faith community is, if we don't stand up for each other's. That's how we stop genocide. That's, I think, how we start moving towards peace.
And this hits on this chapter in my book where I talk about not feeding people's worst fears, right? If we stand up for everyone's rights equally across the board and ensure that we're all, and behave that way towards one another and stand up for each other's rights, even if our own rights are not being oppressed, people can then start to trust us and we can actually move forward. But as soon as you're interested in protecting only yourself and no one else, it makes it very difficult.
It really does. And you're not a trusted agent then. I mean, you're just a selfish agent at that point.
Almost, you were going to say something.
So the way I like to explain that the only way you can respond to this kind of fragmented society that we live in, my only response to that again would be something that again that was referenced earlier was a robust pluralism, wherein diversity is the reality of our life. We've all been created different. We come from different faith traditions and cultures. I have a heavy Indian accent. I'm sure people are finding a way to kind of really understand what I'm saying. We all are distinct and different. That's a reality. I didn't have a choice to be the way I am. But pluralism is when I make an intentional effort to understand you, and you make a very intentional effort to understand me, and we create a space between you and me, so that I know you, I understand you. The rule of the game is not for us to agree with each other. The rule of the game is that we learn to live harmoniously and learn to coexist harmoniously. And in that understanding of each other, then what I create is a cosmopolitan ethic, which is when I know you so deeply that I'll start hurting when you're hurting. And you'll start hurting when I'm hurting. I would have loved to see if Ari Sunshine spoke about Islamophobia, and maybe Azhar Aziz spoke about anti-Semitism. I think we want to get to that point where I don't speak about my faith, but someone else is speaking for me of that same issue that hurts me. I think we want to get, that's kind of an idealism that we want to get to. But pluralism is the way where you accept diversity as a reality of your life.
You know, the best thing I saw actually all day today was those two after their panel. We're out there together in the hall continuing just to chat.
Is Ari here?
Right? I don't know if they are or not, but I applaud that. They were still out there chatting with one another. Yes, thank you. Anything you want to say on this, or can I shift topics? Well, because I'm going to come to you anyway. So, okay, no, get your mic ready. You're probably going to get mad at me. You talked about this kind of common ethic of being able to communicate and have dialogue with one another, almost. And there's a great book, if any of you are interested, by a man named Yuval Levin, where he talks about our entire legal structure, our entire constitutional order is designed in a way to force us to engage in dialogue with one another. And the question is, of course, what do we do if we no longer have the skills to engage in dialogue, right? Because in the United States, we have dispersed power among thousands of actors, and those actors all have to now talk to one another. And what do we do if we can't? And now don't get mad at me because you told me this outside when we weren't on the panel, but you've mentioned that and you mentioned a little bit in your talk now, there are people in your own community who and I think we see this coming up from younger generations even more, that don't want to engage in dialogue. They've got this righteous indignation, and they don't feel like they should have to reach across and have the kind of phone call that you described in your remarks. And we see it on the other side of the aisle as well, right? More and more people just feeling like, I am right, and everyone else is a fool or a monster, and they have to yield. How do we help people overcome that?
Oh gosh, Steve, I'm not sure I know how we help people overcome it, but I do see that, and I will just say I think it is a terrible fault in my own movement, the LGBT movement. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this with putting out a very sometimes angry and just completely self-righteous and kind of discourse, and I know it comes from a place of fear and woundedness, but it's terribly unproductive. I don't know. I apologize, y'all. I don't know what's got into me tonight. It's just sharing really personal things, but I will just go ahead and do it again. In my little Methodist church, we disaffiliated. And I'm sure some of y'all are familiar. There's a division going on in the United Methodist Church and churches that don't support LGBT, I won't say people, but allowing marriages between same-sex couples and letting transgender people be ordained as pastors. And my little church, with people I've known my whole life, who I know love me dearly, including some of my own relatives, voted to disaffiliate over those issues. And it was a really tough experience. It was very painful, but it was also a wonderful experience for me. And I really, just through talking with people, I really came to understand people are complicated. People don't always make sense. Our beliefs are not perfectly coherent. What I came to realize at the end of the day is I don't believe those people love me or others who are LGBT one bit less than they did before. And that to me was a remarkable personal example of being able to be honest with people. And I talked to them and asked them what was going on and why we were voting to do this. And there were a lot of complicated reasons, but at the end of the day, we're all still together in that church, and I still feel very welcome and valued as a part of it. So it can be done. It can be done. I think the wonderful qualities and characteristics that you've sort of synthesized, this just sounds fantastic. I look forward to reading that and learning more about how we do this.
Well, I appreciate that, and wonderful job of deflecting it back to me. I'm going to deflect it to the audience. We have about 6 minutes left. Are there any questions from folks in the audience that they'd like to ask the panelists? Yes, Aaron.
There's been a lot of conversation today about unity between peoples of different faith, but there's also been some othering of people who are not members of a faith. And I'm curious if y'all could talk about how that work of building bridges and finding common ground and being peacemakers works with people who are not part of a faith system.
Okay, I have a comment on that, but I'll let one of you answer first. How do we reach out to others and have these messages of unity and religious freedom work for people who are not of a faith tradition?
We invite the humanist community to the International Religious Freedom Summit, and they participate. They're regularly one of the co-sponsors of it, because in a number of countries, you get persecuted if you have no faith. and they want to have freedom of religion, not to have a faith. And we said, great, glad to have you here, because that's your choice. Great, let's. And I think it's part of the beauty of the free exercise clause. Is the free exercise clause also protects people that have no faith or don't want to claim a faith, and I think that's an important thing to be able to do.
And that's the answer. I mean, the reality is religious liberty law, and this is the current doctrine. It's not just what Steve would wish. There is no such thing as a person without religion when it comes to religious liberty law. And what I mean by that is even atheists and agnostics are protected by religious liberty law. Even the most extreme secularist is protected by religious liberty law. And because we all have the tendency to commit the Puritan mistake, we are all, I shouldn't say we, people, theists are protected from atheists and atheists are protected from theists. That's the way religious liberty works. It protects everybody in their own faith journeys wherever they happen to be at a given time.
I just want to invoke the spirit of Roger Williams here since he came up before. But yeah, for every Puritan mistake, there's a Roger Williams who got kicked out of the Puritan Church in Massachusetts and then was, the foundational thinker and political actor in terms of establishing separation of church and state and defending, creating in a certain way, creating the secular state. And that's a critical part of our tradition, and we should treasure it and, learn about that and teach that as an inherent part of religious liberty, that it's very much about protecting pluralism, including people who don't have a faith. Yeah.
Can I make one other point quickly on this? We did a survey in my office when I was ambassador for religious freedom of countries' LGBT rights issues and religious freedom. And that the countries in the world that are best on religious freedom are also best on LGBT rights. We did survey all these countries about and kind of the rankings on it. And you're looking at it, you're going, well, wait a minute. And then you think about it for just a half a minute, you go, of course, because it's all about the dignity of the individual to choose. This is about your personal dignity and your personal choice. And you may not agree with it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. You can try to convince the other person they're wrong or that you're right. But you have that right, both in public and private, to be able to live the life that you choose.
So humorously, the two groups of people in the United States who get the most angry when I tell them that as a matter of legal doctrine, atheism is just another religion are really devout atheists and really devout Christians. They both get really bothered by that. But they're going to have to live with it. Okay. Other questions? Way up there. Yeah, can you belt it out? Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I do. The question was, there's pressure out there not just to accept LGBT people, but to celebrate those identities. I agree with you. I also see that pressure. I think it's misguided. I think it comes from, just a experience of being excluded and marginalized, and kind of honestly sort of overcompensating for that and asking people not just to treat people equally, not just to accept and support, but to embrace, celebrate, share certain beliefs and ideas about sexuality and gender. And that's a bridge too far. And I mean, I'm doing my best, and others are too, within our movement, to really persuade people that that's not a legitimate thing to ask of other people, and it's not a good way for us to build more public understanding and support. I apologize about that. I don't think it's wrong. It's wrong to ask people to do that. Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to add that that's why the notion of tolerance at one point in time to define pluralism was acceptable, but at this point in time in our history, tolerating the other is not going to kind of make it, because at the end of the day, when you tolerate the other, when you show tolerance towards a minority or marginalized group, you're still compromising their dignity. What is really needed is acceptance and celebration. They become the social fabric of your community. They're equal in humanity. So while we are talking faith conversation, the values and the principles of our faith tradition should allow not just to treat the other people in faith as equals, but just the whole of humanity. And it almost sounds like idealism, but the need of the day is that we got to bank on that if we want harmony in the society. Otherwise, we're headed for a very kind of traumatic kind of society, which I don't think we'll be able to put our arms around it. So this is important work, what we're doing. Thank you. I mean, that's all that I wanted to say.
Okay, I think we are out of time, so if everyone could give our panel one last round of applause.
Think I should ask for a signature? Well, so while we're swapping out the panels, feel free to just stand up. We're not going to take a break, but we're going to roll into the final session, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. And the panelists for the next group can come down. So our next session is about how, thank you, about how black churches fuel civil rights and religious freedom and human dignity. And I've read a little bit about this in the last few months and am convinced that we sometimes overlook the incredible impact and value of the black church on our civil rights and religious freedoms. So I'm delighted that we have a chance to hear from a distinguished panel this evening. The session will be led by Bob Ray Sanders. Some of you may remember him. He had a television program on KER-TV, Newsroom, that he was on. He's also a senior columnist for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and was a courthouse reporter and a political writer, was on the radio. We're really fortunate to have him this evening to lead us in this panel. I'll let him introduce our two guests. After we talk about the black church, we are really fortunate at the end of the panel to have a guest artist with us who will be singing. Her name is Ariel Thomas, and she is a soloist with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church of Plano. And she has graciously agreed to come and sing. We thought it only fitting that after all the talk about religion and religious freedom and about the role of the black church in preserving religious freedom, that Ariel could come and take us to church, so to speak, after it's over. So she'll sing for us, and we'll proceed through then. It's all yours, Bob Ray.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. Y'all, I'm from Fort Worth, so when I say good evening, I need to hear somebody say something. This is going to be an interesting discussion, and we hope you will join in with us too, and we'll get out on time, of course. Joining me are two people that I am proud to introduce. I only met them over the phone, and then the more I learned about them, the more I knew I needed to know more about them. But joining us is Reverend Dr. Lucretia R. Faison, Senior Pastor of St. Paul United Methodist Church, the only church in downtown Dallas that is rooted in the African American experience. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees in education and speech language pathology, respectively, the University of North Texas, and got a master's of divinity from SMU and a doctor of ministry at United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. Reverend Faison has served several other United Methodist churches in North Texas and has been a faithful leader in various roles in the North Texas Conference of the United Methodist Church. Bishop Harold Edwards is senior pastor of the Church of the Living God, Temple 145 in Dallas, where he has served since 1998. He began preaching in his early teens and has been doing so for more than 50 years. Hallelujah. A native of Los Angeles, California, he graduated from LA City College and the Life Bible College with a bachelor's degree in theology. He received his master's of theology and doctorate of ministry degrees from the Technical Institute of Biblical Studies in Orlando and Dickerson Bible Institute, respectively. He united with the Church of the Living God in the late 1960s and has served as a leader in churches throughout the country. Before I go to the panelists, I'd just like to give you my perspective of the Black church in the Civil Rights Movement, and then I'll go to our two panel members to talk about not only their churches, but their own involvement in the Civil Rights Movement and this whole movement of trying to bring people together. So if you will, let me take you back. Go back with me. Can we go back to the past, around 1860? Okay, can y'all travel that far? 1860. Because you see, back then, I mean, if you looked like me back then, you may have found yourself, I mean, particularly in the South, in a little shack. And in the night, you'd hear this voice of a woman singing, "Wade in the water, wade in the water. God's going to trouble the waters." Or Miss Harriet, I'm talking about Harriet Tubman, for y'all who don't know her as well as I do. Miss Harriet might be singing, "Steal away to Jesus. I ain't got long to stay here." Or maybe the song was "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home." Regardless of the song, in those days, those songs, those Black church songs, were a signal to those who Harry was ready to lead to freedom. Wade in the water? Meet me down by the riverside. Yeah. We're getting ready to leave here. Yeah. Steal away? The time is right now. We don't have time to waste. Come on, let's go. Swing low? I got a chariot waiting for y'all, so come on, we're ready. And then you just move up, progress 100 years later to 1960. Keep in mind, we're going 100 years. Blacks who supposedly had been freed were still living under Jim Crow laws, still tied to the land through these things that they used to call sharecropping, that you could never pay off. You stayed tied to that land that your ancestors had been tied to as slaves. And along with them, even though they were now freed, supposedly, they were in civil rights movements. The height of the civil rights movement was 1960. They were singing those same songs that Harriet came through singing. Plus, they were singing along with them, "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around." And of course, "We Shall Overcome." 1960, still segregated. And guess what? The Black church was still that leaning post, that rock that we still had, the center of the Black community. That was the Black church. Because you see, we were banned from public spaces. I just told you I was from Fort Worth. My family goes back 160 years in Fort Worth. They were landowners, which meant they paid taxes. But many of the things that my parents and foreparents' taxes bought, I could never use. I mean, the Forest Park Zoo, one of the best zoos in the world. People who look like me can only go one day out of the year. The swimming pool, the largest swimming pool in the city, we could swim in it one day out of the year. That was June 19th, by the way. Juneteenth, and look at Miss Opal Lee over in Fort Worth, got that to become a national holiday. Here we were, still tied to this concept of slavery. So what did we do? We did what we always did. We turned to the church. When important people came to town and they gave speeches, they often gave them from the church because they didn't have any other place to go. When you think about the Southern Leadership Conference, when you think about Rosa Parks, and here they were at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church trying to figure out what we're going to do if Rosa Parks got arrested for riding on the bus, in the front of the bus. That meeting was formed in the church. Most of the leaders who came through the Southern Leadership Conference, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SELC, those were preachers. We depended on the preachers. They led us. They were our true leaders. Because in those days, it had almost stopped us from being elected to any national office or state office for that matter. So here they were. Think about Martin Luther King. He got selected to lead that group because he was the youngest and the newest preacher in town. They didn't have anything on him yet. So he led. And then you think about the church being so centered that it was targeted. The church was so important to the people who were opposed to people like me that they bombed the churches. They set fire to the churches. They tried to intimidate the preachers. And so when you consider that in 1965, when they bombed that church in Birmingham, 4 little girls sitting in Sunday school were killed. And you see, and I heard the panel before, and they were talking about, how do we talk about faith and if religious people just did what they were supposed to do. But I had to recall that there was a time when some religious people were at a cross burning on Saturday night and in church on Sunday morning. And some of them in the pulpit. In Fort Worth, there was a time you couldn't get elected to office unless you were a member of the Klan. And so, and I think about this, and I'll shut up so we can get on with our discussion. I think about when Martin Luther King went to Memphis in 1968. And again, the marchers were on the street, but the speeches, the planning, that was at a church. The night before he was killed, Martin gave a speech it was so prophetic because people saw him predicting his own death. And he tells the crowd, well, I don't know what's going to happen to me now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter because I've been to the mountaintop. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. So I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So tonight I'm not worried about a thing. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. The next night, Martin was not feeling well. He wasn't going to the meeting that night. But he got a call, urgent call, saying, hey, you got to come here. There's a church full of people, and they want to hear you. They want to hear the preacher. And Martin got up to go, met for a while on the balcony with his cohorts, laughing and talking. And then he saw Ben Branch. Ben was the leader of the choir and the person who did the keyboard on the music. And he leaned over and said, hey, Ben, play Precious Lord for me tonight. Play one of those old church songs, Precious Lord, play that. He used to wake Mahalia Jackson up in the middle of the night and say, hey, Mahalia, I need to hear Precious Lord. And she'd sing from her bed, that Precious Lord. Well, obviously, he didn't get to hear Precious Lord that night. Mahalia did sing it at his memorial a few days later. And when I think about it, at Precious Lord, Thomas Dorsey, who wrote that song, composed that song after his wife died and he didn't have anything else to lean on but Precious Lord. He would say to you right now, just based on what I've said so far, somebody ought to say amen. So,
Amen.
Thank you. Let me go to you, and tell us about your historic church, St. Paul. Both of you have a couple of the oldest churches in the city, and they've been involved all the way through. So tell us a little bit about that and your own experience.
That's correct. St. Paul is, well, this is our 151st year. Last year we celebrated 150 years.
150 years. All right.
Yeah, it's an awesome congregation. It was founded by emancipated people from Louisiana and Texas. And it's in the exact same location. It's been the same location the entire time. Not the same building, but the same place. And it is a story of resilience. And as you were talking there, I was just thinking about that and thinking about how when you're talking about religious freedom and the Black church, you are talking about it through the lens of racial justice. Those two are just intertwined. There's no way to separate the two. And that is steeped in the history of St. Paul. The original facility actually burned, and the people rebuilt the church, and it was rebuilt over a period of almost, I think, 20 years. And you can see this in the mosaic of the bricks because they're different colors. And so they did fundraisers or, did what they had to do and just brought those bricks over the years to create the current structure. It is a story, it's a church that is, as you said, has been involved in civil rights and social justice. There are many of the pastors who were in the church before were leaders in the community and were out front. Houston Tillerson College started at St. Paul. So there's a strong commitment to education, a strong relationship with Booker T. Washington, which is high school, which is right across the street. The Dallas Bethlehem Center was birthed out of St. Paul. It is committed to working with families and early childhood education in South Dallas. And so the church is always, it's always had a history of involvement in the Black community. In the political sphere, we still have politicians to come in and speak on Sundays. And I always say to them, you can't tell them how to vote, but you can speak. I have an interesting history in being at St. Paul in that I came from a predominantly white congregation to this church. And so it's a very interesting dichotomy for me in talking about this whole thing about religious freedom and coming from an environment where it was often challenging to bring up the issues and concerns of the day, especially as it related to justice in that environment. And then having the freedom that I have now I better talk about it. You know what I mean? I have to address the issues that are affecting people of color and marginalized communities. That is still a priority for the Black church. The Black church has historically been that center for social and activism and justice and cultural involvement, all of those things. Our identity, I think, as African Americans is deeply rooted in the Black church, even though that landscape has changed. And there are a lot of shifts that have occurred. I still believe it is the center of Black culture, identity, activism. It is still very much, even though we don't have the same number of people attending church, even in the African American community, studies still show that it still has significant impact and influence in the Black community.
I want to talk about that more in a minute, but Bishop, you go ahead.
I think Bob was looking at my notes because he said everything I had to. Listen, I am thankful and grateful for this opportunity to come and share with you tonight. I want to thank Mark Rumney for the invitation and all of the staff people who were responsible for my presence here. I am the senior pastor of the Church of the Living God. The Church of the Living God, in spite of what history reports as the Methodist Church being the oldest church in the country, the Church of the Living God was founded by a gentleman by the name of William Christian in 1889. We claim to be the oldest Black organization in America because William Christian did not bring with him the doctrinal positions of those early Europeans who came to America. He founded his organization on what he read and studied from the scripture, and as a result of that, we became known as the Church of the Living God. The Church of the Living God, where I serve, has been in existence since 1900. We celebrated 124 years this year, and I'm.
Yeah, you can applaud.
Well, thank you very much. I haven't been there 124 years, but 26 of those years I've been serving as pastor. I'm trying to get 5 more years in. And the reason for that is that the longest serving pastor had been there for 30 years. And I want to do 31 because I want to leave as the longest serving pastor of Temple 145. The background for that, I'll just share with you for a moment. When I arrived, I was told by the chairman of the board that they were praying. There had been 5 or 6 pastors who preceded me before I was assigned to that particular congregation. And none of those pastors lived past 2-3 years, and they died. I was called by what we call the chief bishop, that's the head of our organization, and was told that I was going to go to Temple 145. When I shared that information with my family, my baby, who's now 38 years old, said to me, "Dad, you can't go there. They kill pastors up there." And I said, "Well, I don't have a choice. We have an Episcopal form of government where we are assigned by bishops, and I was assigned by our senior bishop at that time." When I arrived at this congregation, I was told by the chairman of the board that the church had been in prayer since the last pastor died, and about a year before I went after that. And they had been praying that the Lord would send us what we need and not what we want. And the day that I arrived at that church, I heard somebody remark, "That ain't what we want." And so every once in a while, I have to remind them that I'm not here because you wanted me here. I'm here because you needed me here. And I heard somebody say, "Well, he'll be here a couple of years and he'll die too." So I'm now in my 26th year. I want to get 5 more years in so I can be the longest serving pastor there. I did want to share 1 or 2 comments about the black church and its experience. You mentioned 1860, at a time when it was against the law for people of color to read or write. And because of the church, many of our folk were able to learn how to read and write. It was the black church that helped institute that. Many of the HBCUs that are in existence today started in churches, somebody's church basement or somebody's church auditorium. They came into existence during that time. We look back over our experiences now and recognize the fact that according to Ministry Magazine, that 38% of the Christian community worldwide has elected not to return to the church after this pandemic. And we're experiencing that in the congregation where I serve, and the numbers are just about there. We're increasing week after week. But one of the exciting things that has happened to us, our scriptures say that we would do a greater work than Christ did. And I think as a result of technology, we are doing that. Many of you know that if you've been to Israel, you can travel around the Holy Land, as it's called, in about 4 or 5 hours, circle it, if you will. And our progenitor, our Savior, the Christ, I heard Sam talk about that too. I'm a believer too, that if I get people to come to know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, I think I've done a good job. But by the same token, I'm willing to accept other folk for what they believe and how they believe it. I think we're all going to see his face one day. It's my contention that within every one of us, there is a part of God. Because the scripture says that when he formed man out of the dust of the ground, he blew into man's nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. I think that's God in us. I believe that it's in us. And so people have various ideas about who God is and how they should serve him and what they should do with him. You're talking about freedom and world peace. One of the greatest movements in the country, even as I speak, is the Unification Church. The Unification Church was started by the Reverend Sung Mun Moon. You've heard his name mentioned before. And his wife now is carrying on. She's doing more to advance world peace than any other organization that I know of, including the church that I belong to, by her efforts to bring religions together, faiths together, and to establish peace. I think, Sam, you're right. If we can get to the Christian community and have them move forward with the idea of freedom, then we'll be better served for that. Things are not a whole lot different now than they were in those early days. Those of us who are of color still have to suffer some indignations and some problems that people have. I don't know why that's so, but it is. There's a movement now by our government here in the state of Texas with school vouchers, taking money from our taxes, giving it to other folks so they can put their children in private schools. That's an attempt because private schools don't have to teach black history. They don't have to teach what happened to our culture, how our people came through the areas of race and problems, things. And when I walk, this is my 5th or 6th time being here at the museum, but when I go through the museum and I come to that area for black history, I don't really see the real truth of what we experience. Dogs being sicked on us, water holes being sprayed upon us. I'm grateful that it is. You mentioned Dr. Opal Lee, who's developing a civil rights museum in Fort Worth, where you're from. I think it's going to have a better story to tell than what we have seen here. But I'm thankful that there is some acknowledgement as you go through to see, because our young people don't really know the history of black folks and our culture. The church has always been the center for our community. You mentioned that. The pastors, ministers were always the leaders, and we took what they said as gospel. We could believe and trust what they told us. And it was the only place that we could go and meet. Back in those days, when they had an opportunity to go to church on Sunday, they dressed up. I mean, they decked out hats and furs and whatever they could get their hair. Now church is a casual thing, you know. People just come as you are. Kind of an acceptable thing across all religious lines. Because we know that salvation is not about clothes. But back in those days, the church was an opportunity for our folk to come to get together, and they were able to dress up and have a fellowship with one another. You know, families were torn apart during the period of slavery time. People don't like to talk about that. Educational system says that we don't want to infuriate races because talking about black history, you know, but that's what school vouchers are all about, so they could go and not have to teach that in schools. I say to my children and to my church that you need to know your history. I say to our parents, you need to know where we've come from. The only way to have an appreciation for the future is that you got to know the past and to understand what our people have come through, our culture has experienced over the years, and some of the difficulties that we had. You talked about the bombings of the church. You didn't mention swinging from trees, not because we wanted to, but because people forced us into that kind of thing. It's been difficult for me. I've been preaching for 66 years now, and I started very young. In another 13 months, I'll be 80 years old. And in my denomination, I'm forced into retirement at the age of 80. When that was brought up, I was told that you're the one who wrote that law. And I can see myself at 20, 30 years old sitting in the congregation, looking at all of those old bishops sitting on the platform and saying, listen, why don't they sit down, let some of us young men take this thing and move it forward, not realizing that if you live long enough, you'll be 80 years old. So I wrote a law to put myself out of a job in the next 13 months. But I'm grateful that I've had this opportunity, this privilege to serve our church and I can't remember. I used to keep a record of weddings and funerals and converts. The numbers got to the point to where I just stopped and I don't record those anymore. But I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to serve and to lead folk to Christ. That's enough.
Well, let me go back to something you both hit on, and I want to bring it more specifically to the Black church. But as you noted, that church membership all over has declined since the pandemic. Well, first of all, why? Number two, and let me ask you, is the Black church as relevant to young people as it once was?
I think there are quite a few reasons as to why church attendance, I think the pandemic that you already mentioned is one factor, but also the culture is different. You know, I can remember Texas blue laws where things were closed on Sundays. And now you have, you know, there are a lot of options. People have more options, more freedom. There are a lot of weekend activities. We have a generation of people who have not grown up in the church. And I think that people have the right and the freedom to believe differently. And so, you know, Black life is not monolithic. We have changed and moved out in different directions. Even some of it is geographical. People have moved in different areas. For example, St. Paul was a part of Freedmanstown, and that area was restricted to African. That was where we were safe. That's where we needed to stay within those boundaries in many ways in order to be safe. And then you have development that comes in freeways that are constructed. So homes that were once in that area are gone, and so now it's down. We are surrounded now by, you know, skyscrapers and buildings, not communities and neighborhoods. So some of it is just geographical movement and things that have displaced our people. And also, you know, as times have grown and things have changed, people also begin to question, you know, traditions and their faith. Young people in particular, you know, begin to question faith and wonder, why is it important? I also was looking at something recently, forgive me, I can't remember where it is, but it also said that the way we live our lives today is not conducive to being in church every Sunday. That our lives are so hectic and so packed that it's difficult even to maintain that tradition. What I'm finding at St. Paul, though, which is an older congregation, is that I am seeing a trend with younger people beginning to come back in a sense. And some of it, I think, is because of the hectic pace and the challenges and the stress of life, beginning to sense the need for a faith tradition. And so I do think the church is still relevant. I think some of the pressures and stresses of today in the current society, the challenges that we're facing, that we continue to face as African Americans, some of those things have not changed, or they've changed in ways of just that some of the things are more subtle, but still prevalent. And so I think some of those challenges are pushing us pushing younger people back to church, but I think it's still a challenge. And I think it has forced us to kind of look at the church, the Black church, as an institution because we have to be relevant. We have to be willing to make changes. We have to be able to speak to the current issues that are facing people today.
I think the times are different. Any of us in here who are 50 years or older lived in a different era. On Sunday morning, we knew where we were going. I mean, there was no question about it. We started getting ready on Saturday night. Mom would cook her dinner on Saturday evening, so she wouldn't have to cook. We just come home. Listen, we take the food to the church because on Sunday we went in for Sunday school. We stayed for the morning worship service. We had dinner on the ground. We were there for an afternoon program. In the evening, we came to BTU for youth meetings, and then we stayed for the night service. We'd go to church at 9 o'clock in the morning. It would be 10 o'clock at night before we got back, sometimes on Sundays. And so times are different. Now, children, parents of our children nowadays give their children a choice. They will ask them, do you want to go to church today? The kids say, oh, yeah, I'm going. And everybody gets ready to go to church. You want to go to church today? No, I don't think I want to go. Okay. And they're left at home to fend for themselves. I think technology has a lot to do with the fact that the Christian community is not going back to church. Because you could sit at home at your kitchen table or lay in your bed or in your breakfast nook and watch a variety of religious programs. And that's what a lot of folk are doing these days, getting their services from media and texting some money or Zelle some money in and think that you're doing God's service. The scripture says that we ought not forget the assembling of ourselves together. The church needs to come together. Also look at it from the standpoint of Jesus saying a greater work that you will do. I think technology has helped us in that sense because all of a sudden the storefront church down on the corner, the middle-sized church around the block, all became as large as T.D. Jakes or Joel Osteen, because during the pandemic, we all were doing the same thing. We were streaming our services across the airwaves. Our church invested quite a bit of money into cameras and systems in order to get that done. And so there are a lot of people who are still claiming to be Christians, but they're getting their Christianity from the television set or from the computer or from wherever they're watching this live stream service coming from. That's
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well,
No, I was just going to chime in there and say, we used to hear all the time, at least when I was growing up, is that what you do on the inside of the walls is fine. Mm-hmm. But what are you doing outside the walls of the church? And that's what I'm wondering about in terms of the black church particularly. Are they doing as much outside the walls as they ought to be doing?
I think a lot of them are. We have, I've seen this and our church participates in this too. On Sundays or weekdays or whenever, we see a lot of churches distributing food and clothes. We have connection, our local congregation, with World Vision. We pick up items and stuff for our community, and we have these huge giveaways once a month at our congregation. So we're trying to help people and help our community. What I've discovered is that our giveaways don't really benefit the church. I mean, I've seen hundreds of people come through our church, pick up food, clothing, items, furniture, whatever we had available for them, and say, oh, Rev, I'll be here Sunday. You know, Sunday come, they don't show up. they get that stuff. And I'll tell you one thing, too, that I've discovered, too, and then I'll stop. We have this connection with World Vision. Most of you may be familiar with that. And we get these items that they give to us to distribute in the community. And we have these massive giveaways, generally on a Saturday, you know. And when I drive from my residence to the church and pass through the neighborhood where our church is located, I see folk in their yards with yard sales with the stuff that they picked up on Saturday from our church to do whatever they need to do, I guess, benefit however they need to benefit from. So I don't see how those kinds of things really benefit the church. People who get in need, they always call the church, and they need rent, they need food, they need clothing. And my first question to them is, what church do you belong to? Oh, Rev, I don't go to anybody's church right now, but can you help us? Yeah, I said, well, I have some numbers here, and I have a whole list of numbers where you could call for housing and help and rent and all that kind of stuff, food. And it really disturbed me when I see folk in the street. I know, I'm gonna quit. It disturbed me when I see folk, these guys out there with these big signs with, I'm a veteran and I need help. I mean, listen, Uncle Sam takes care of their veterans. There's no reason for a veteran to be outside with a sign saying that they need help. There are too many opportunities for them to get the help that they need from the government. And really, when they say, I'll work, and I'll say to somebody, hey, come on, get in the car. I got a little job for you. Oh, well, can't you just give me some money? I need to tell them, no, please.
But I do think that the church is still involved, or is still that center in a sense for engagement with the community. And I do think that's what is appealing to young people. One of the things that we try to do at St. Paul is work with and have partnerships with, we have a partnership with a law firm that's near us, with a local bank that has helped us with some of our programs, because we do have, like a lot of churches have, a program for feeding unsheltered persons that are around the church. And we have a ministry called Walk Over Wednesday with high school students across from Booker T. Washington High School, where they come for afternoon snacks, and we're trying to engage them. What I've found is younger people are interested in being active in things that make a difference. We have a partnership with the Dallas Institute, and we've had conversations on the civil rights movement in Dallas and things like that. So there are opportunities, I think, if the church is going to continue to be relevant, to have those partnerships that speak to the needs and also to the issues that are happening around us. I think when people see that engagement, then the church is still being the relevant center that it has always been. I think there are struggles for sure, but I think we can still be that center that we have historically been.
Okay, we're actually out of time, but I want to give each of you 30 seconds to say something that you didn't say.
I don't think I need it.
You don't need it?
I don't think I need 30 seconds.
Well, I'm going to take your 30 seconds and add with mine.
I knew he would. I knew he would. That's why I said 30 seconds.
The church is very relevant. Whether it's black or white or Hispanic or whatever race it is, there's always a need to find a relationship.
I'm going to change my mind, so go ahead, give my 30 seconds.
She changed her mind, so I got 20 seconds. I want to say that it's very important because we have all of those programs as well for our young people. Our young people, the church is still doing what it always has done, especially in the black church, is to try to educate our people. So we have classes for finances. We have classes for parenting, for young mothers to come. We provide them with all of the necessities for newborns and all that kind of thing. And so we're doing the work. We're just not getting the people that we need to get. Okay. That's it.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to say is that the church still has to do the work of civil rights, and the church has to do that in partnership. And if we're going to talk about religious freedom, then our partners have to be willing to engage in that work of justice as well. Because sometimes I think if we're talking about interfaith and all religious traditions and freedom and all of that, I think sometimes the lack of engagement from the Black community is because for us, the bottom line in that is civil rights. And there has to be engagement and there has to be partnership. And that was one of the things I was trying to, as gently as I could, push the white congregation that I was working with, say, this is your business too. And so we have to have that partnership. It has to cut both ways.
Exactly.
Isn't it a wonderful thing that we live in a country where we have religious freedom? No matter what your freedom is, listen, even if you're an atheist, I heard somebody say that's a religion,
Yeah.
and you have free to exercise your religion. There are countries in the world where you cannot exercise freedom of religion. You're bound to do one thing. So thank God that we live in a world or in a country where we have religious freedom.
Join me in thanking our panel members. Thank you, panel.
Good evening, everyone. I bring you greetings from the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church in Plano, Texas, where we will be celebrating our 140th anniversary on November, the second Sunday in November. I am honored to be here today. I've heard some wonderful things. We got here about 5 o'clock, so we got in on a couple of sessions. I heard that we should learn about each other so we can protect each other and talk to others about our friends from different places. I've learned about being a peacemaker and the things I need to do to bring peace among the nations. And I've heard that we as Black people need to continue doing what we've always been doing, and that's to be together in order to be strong. As you said, I think it was you, Doctor, that we lived in certain areas for safety. And that's the way it was for my sisters and I. We lived in the Douglas community in Plano, Texas, and that was our safety there. Of all the things that have been said, I want to leave you with this, that it is only by the grace of God that we are here today. It is only by the grace of God that we are able to do the things that we do from day to day. So if you feel yourself a little bit above everybody else, just bring yourself down and say, it is only by the grace of God that I am here. It's His grace, His amazing grace, that keeps us here. Amazing grace shall always be my song of praise, for it was grace that bought my liberty. I do not know just why He came to love me so. He looked beyond my faults and saw my needs. And I shall forever lift mine eyes to Calvary, to view the cross where Jesus died for me. How marvelous that grace that caught my falling soul. He looked beyond my faults and saw my needs. And I shall forever lift mine eyes to Calvary, to view the cross where Jesus died for me. How marvelous that grace that caught my falling soul. He looked beyond my faults and saw my needs. Thank you.
you, Bob Sanders. Thank you, Lucretia. Thank you, Bishop. I'm Mark Romney. I'm so happy to be with you today and to have been able to experience the things which we've felt and we've enjoyed today. Before I begin my brief closing remarks, I want to let you know that if you have parked in the garage, make sure that you get the QR code as you go out the door and put your license plate number on it. And even if you have used a credit card to get in and out, they will reimburse that for you. We will not get charged for it, in other words. So please do that. And we also have a table out front that has some literature. Please feel free to take that literature and use it and distribute it to your friends. After my remarks, we're going to have a benediction by one of my dearest friends, Marzouk Jami, Imam Marzouk Jami of the Islamic Association of DeSoto, who is Mr. Interfaith throughout all of Dallas. And we love him very much, and we're so grateful to have him with us tonight. The theme of this year's summit has been finding common ground. We've been privileged to hear from panelists from different religions, backgrounds, races, political backgrounds, and sexual orientations, among other differences. What has been done is not easy and may be uncomfortable for some, but in our country, in the state of Texas and the DFW Metroplex, these discussions are necessary, even vital to our continued peaceful existence and prosperity. As we close, I want to thank all of those who have participated in the panels, helped organize the summit, you who have taken the time out of your life to come and hear and participate, and most of all, to this wonderful place, the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, whose mission is to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference by its very existence. It calls on us, each of us, to examine our lives, our thoughts, and our actions, and to do better, to find common ground with others. It is not enough for us to come, listen, and learn, and then return to our lives forgetting what we have heard and felt here today. My challenge to each of you is to take the concepts you have learned, the impressions you have felt, and resolve to do something about it. I challenge each of you to become a peacemaker. A peacemaker, as we've learned so ably today, is someone who reconciles people with God and with one another, wrote Dolores Smith, a nationally published author on faith and parenting. She continues, quote, "Peacemaking as such requires taking the initiative to get involved in conflicts with the intention of building bridges between the parties at odds." The concept of peace, of making peace, extends through practically every religious tradition. In the Old Testament, the book of Psalms 34:14, "Depart from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it." The New Testament, book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." The ideal of peace suffuses the religious concepts of the Holy Quran. The revelation and the night on which it came down are peace. Peace is the pinnacle of the Muslim paradise. God is peace. One of the leaders of my faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, President Dallin H. Oaks, has taught our members recently that, quote, "On contested issues, we should seek to moderate and unify." This is a time of many harsh and hurtful words in public communications and sometimes even in our families. Sharp differences on issues of public policy often result in actions of hostility, even hatred in public and personal relationships. Vulgarity, fault finding, and evil speaking of others are all too common. Too many pundits, politicians, entertainers, and other influencers throw insults constantly. It is concerning that so many people seem to believe that it is completely acceptable to condemn, malign, and vilify anyone who does not agree with them. Many seem eager to damage another's reputation with pathetic and pithy barbs. Anger never persuades. Hostility builds no one. Contention never leads to inspired solutions. Instead of anger, hostility, and contention, let us try to demonstrate charity. Charity is the antidote to contention. Charity, which forms a crucial role in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, as well as almost every other religion, is the spiritual gift that helps us to cast off the type of personality who is selfish, defensive, prideful, and jealous. Charity defines a peacemaker. This evening, I urge each of us to replace belligerence with beseeching, animosity with understanding, and contention with peace. As we pursue our preferred policies and public actions, let us use the language and methods of peacemakers. In our families and other personal relationships, let us avoid what is harsh and harmful. As President Oaks again recently added, quote, we need to love, to do good to all. We need to avoid contention and be peacemakers in all our communications. This does not mean to compromise our principles and priorities, but to cease harshly attacking others for theirs. We need to practice what is popularly known as the Golden Rule. And this comes from Matthew, but it is applicable in all of the faiths that I'm aware of. All things whatsoever ye should do, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Thank you, good night, and may God bless. Arzu?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbi Alameen. With God's name, merciful benefactor, merciful redeemer, praise be to God, the cherisher and sustainer of the world. I want to say to my great friend Mark Romney, he really could have led this prayer himself. He just done so beautiful, Bob, until I have to just follow him. My prayer is al-As. Surely for the token of time, man is at loss, except those who do good and exalt one another to truth and exalt one another to peace. We come here tonight in peace, and let us go in peace. Thank God. Amen. Peace be with you. And Bob?